Well, hello again. I can't see you anymore. Welcome back to the 12th Annual Homeland Security Symposium and Expo, co-hosted by CNU's Center for American Studies, HII, Dominion Energy, and Drainpipe. For those of you who are just joining us, I'm Nathan Bush, co-director of CNU's Center for American Studies. I think we had a terrific set of discussions yesterday, and we're excited about the panels and the keynote speeches today. But before we turn to the first panel session for the day, please allow me to reiterate two things from my comments yesterday, and actually one additional item. So as I mentioned yesterday, we're in the process of designing a master's degree in national security at CNU. And if you could forward to the next slide, I don't see a clicker here. Oh, there it is. There we go. On the slide behind me, you'll see a QR code for a survey that the Office of Graduate Studies here at CNU has created to help gauge interest in the MA. If you wouldn't mind, please fill this out if you or members of your organization might be interested in the master's program. We also have hard copies of this survey at the registration desk if you're old school and want to go with the paper and pencil variety. Secondly, let me again thank the sponsors for the event. Beginning first with a heartfelt thanks to the co-hosts of this event, HII, Dominion Energy, and Drainpipe, as well as the multitude of other sponsors and supporters of the event. We're absolutely delighted by the widespread support that this conference has received from across the region and, in fact, across the country. We think it's going to be a terrific building block for future years, and we're really grateful for the support. The third item that I wanted to mention is yesterday, some people, perhaps because of all of the rain and terrible weather, perhaps just because of a lack of communication, did not park solely in the visitor lot or the parking deck, and therefore received tickets. I guess our ticketing office is very diligent, even in the bad weather. So if you received a ticket, please give it to one of our intrepid junior fellows at the front desk, and we will try our best to get it waived. All right. Oh, and please park in the visitor lot and the parking deck. All right. All right, well, I think we are ready to roll into the very first panel. So, they'll introduce themselves. I'll get off the stage, give us just a minute while the first panel comes up, and then we'll roll right into it. But thank you again for being here, and we're really excited for the events of the day. Thank you.
We're going to talk about supply chain vulnerability, if you didn't know it. That's what this morning's first track. We'll introduce ourselves. I'm Rob Cranston, here to facilitate with these gentlemen up here. And by all means, an interactive way as we go. So please, by all means, as you have those questions, come on up to the mics right here and fire away. I do encourage everybody to go see the vendors that are here. Phenomenal technology and phenomenal subject matter experts. Just digging into what they do day to day is incredibly impressive for critical infrastructure and, well, a lot of the basis of what we're here. You can see it out there real time. So, all right, can everybody hear me? now. Nathan, yeah, I will be coming to you for those tickets, buddy, wherever you are. All right, there you are. Okay, so here we go. I want to get you guys introduced, so let's start. Charles, yourself.
All right, I'm Charles Marshall, Director of Shared Services for Dominion Energy. What that encompasses is supply chain. I have responsibility for all of RNG, which is renewable natural gas and liquefied natural gas for Dominion, and then power generation, which is our fossil and hydro plants from a supply chain perspective for South Carolina. Transmission distribution, when you're driving down the street, you see the transmission lines and different things of that nature, as well as South Carolina gas. I also have responsibility for facilities management for everything that's in South Carolina.
Thomas.
Well, good morning again. Or did you have something?
No, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Tom Chadwick. I was on a panel yesterday, so I've been with Dominion Energy since 2019. Prior to that, I was an FBI agent for 22 years. Prior to that, for 10 years, I did various engineering roles. Owned and ran my own small business for 4 years, and again, happy to be here, sort of pinch hitting with my friend Charles. So glad
great.
to be here. And Adam Lee should be joining us here shortly.
Yeah, Adam will be coming up here. So yeah, thank you, gentlemen. We did have Dr. Leslie Wilhelm, who is a Naval Surface Warfare Center at Indian Head. She unfortunately came down with a bug. I think a lot of folks in the Northern Virginia, well, across the country, are this time of year. But we do miss her. She was, and she has been representing critical infrastructure wargaming in the design through Indo-Pacific, and with the intent of creating operational energy and other types of what are scenario based for energy inserted into different scenarios for those wargaming efforts. So I'll pinch hit a little bit inside that to talk a little as we talk through supply chain vulnerability on the DoD side. But what we're going to do, so what we'll do is we'll cut across 4 different areas here, 4 buckets, if you will. So supply chain security vulnerability, disruptions, tariffs and supply chain impacts, and then technology transition. We call them challenges, but really how those that are part of the ecosystem in Dominion, I think, with suppliers and others, it's critically important, especially in Charles' case, to make sure they're vetted and they're part of the assurance that no vulnerabilities or limited vulnerabilities are impacting Dominion. So that being said, so let's get into the first bucket and really in the supply chain vulnerability. And the first question, and a lot of these were framed earlier. You guys know how the deal is. We framed these questions before, but we're going to riff a little bit here. So I think it's important that you get the trueness out of that. So, but Charles, let's start with you. What is the impact of cyber threats on energy supply chains in your world, the vendor supplier selection, and your end users within your area of purview, sir?
Yeah, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that any cyber attack on any vendor within the supply chain could cause massive disruptions. Oftentimes what happens is, from a Dominion perspective, what we do, and I guess I should rephrase that, not often, all the time, we do is we vet suppliers to assess their cyber posture, to see what mitigation strategies they are using prior to us enacting or engaging in business with them. We also send out a questionnaire to see if their cyber posture is fitting to the expectations that Dominion requires. If it does not fit to what we expect it to be, then we just will not engage in business with them.
Yeah. And with that, is there in that, in perspective of vetting those vendors, does that how often are you changing that vetting type of scenario or questionnaire or other? Is that pretty often?
Yes, it is. So we have a cybersecurity department
Yeah.
who stays on top of this. You know, technology is always rapidly changing.
Right.
And so anytime that there's something else that's introduced from a cyber perspective, then they update the questionnaire appropriately. We have clauses within all of our contracts to let the vendor know that we reserve the right to come back and re-vet them at any point in time. And what that does is it gives us some assurance that, hey, we're doing our proper due diligence to make sure that our networks are safe.
Yeah. Yeah, good, great stuff. Tom, your perspective on that?
Yeah, my perspective, I think where it relates most to me are some of the supply chain engagements we have on the physical security side of the house. When you think about to the cyber concerns, just the control of the data, right? Like, so when we think about our drone program, if we're using our drones, I mean, a drone is really a flying computer, let's be honest, right? I mean, you can fly the drone, it can provide real-time feedback. That provides a lot of value for sure, a lot of value during a storm or something like that. But more often than not, we're flying over our infrastructure. It's, with LiDAR or something like that, it's sucking up what is essentially data. And then at some point that data is downloaded. It's post-processed, nowadays using a variety of AI-enabled tools to provide information on our infrastructure that's valuable to us. So that could be like poles that have splintering and are weakening. That could be degradation in a tower and a transmission line. That could be things like vegetation growth that we want to get out and trim, in advance of a storm. Well, all that is all information that could potentially be used against us by our adversaries, whatever form and shape that adversary might take. So if we're utilizing, say, a third party or fourth party, and this is where, we rely a lot on the assistance of our supply chain management team, you could be a landscaper, let's say, and they're using a subcontractor, or that subcontractor is using a subcontractor, and it goes down, and that's just a simple example, goes down several layers, and they're using a drone. Well, I don't know where that data is necessarily going. We have, things in our T&Cs, I think, that say you can't do this, that, or the other thing with that data. But that's still a risk and it's a challenge. And so in a lot of respects, from a security perspective, the more we can do some of those sort of, hit the easy button and do those things internally and control that data internally, I think it makes the company safer. Obviously, we can't do that, writ large across the department. I think Charles will correct me, but I think we have, is it like 50,000 vendors that we use? It's some
60.
60. There you go. I was cutting it short. 60,000 vendors that we're dealing with, that we're trying to vet. And of course, there's a prioritization to that. I would, if we're buying paper clips and stationery, it's not quite so important as if we're buying, switch gear in a substation or something like that. But, it goes back layer, and it's certainly a challenge. We do rely a lot on our cyber team to assist with that vetting process. And I don't know, Charles, I don't want to steal your thunder, but you may talk about TPRM at some point too. So
Definitely, I definitely want to add something. When he's talking about vendors and he says, hey, there's a prioritization, nowadays the world is becoming more digitized. All right. And with that, I can think, 20 years ago, you would think about a wood pole, for example. There was never any kind of IT component on a wood pole. All right. You fast forward to 2025, and now you have IT components on a wood pole to say, hey, this pole is being set in this location, or hey, this is the length of time the pole has been there. So it helps us to know, hey, when it's time to replace that pole. Well, all of those could lend itself if someone was a bad actor or something get into that and get into our network. So you have to look at it from a different perspective nowadays as well. So I think that's a very important point that you raise. While we say, hey, a substation is very critical, there are things that you would think are less apt to be infiltrated that we still have to make sure we vet properly in order to protect our network.
Yeah, those are great points. And excuse me, from a supply chain perspective, and really along the backbone of the supply chain, assuring, let's say, censored, back to the pole analogy, which is the technology that now feeds either that sensor technology or other that's on that. How do you guys make sure that those assets are maintained and the sustainability of those technologies? Is that from again, is it, sure, there's contract to contract and supplier vetting, but truly, how does that, if there's failures in that supply chain, how do you come in to try and correct that?
Yeah, so we have clauses within our T's and C's that if there's any kind of failure, and I think I'm answering your question, if there's any kind of failure from that vendor perspective, they have, I think it's in 24 hours, they have to contact us to let us know what those failures are. We start an investigative analysis along with our cyber security team in order to ascertain, what is the threat to Dominion.
Gotcha.
And everything.
Right.
And is Dominion's exposure one that requires certain steps to go further than whatever they're doing? So they have to be forthcoming with that information. We have our own group of individuals who are constantly monitoring different situations as well. So if they hear something and let's say the vendor did not contact us within 24 hours, oftentimes we will contact them and say, hey, we've heard that you've had X, Y, and Z. Did you contact us per the contract? And so those are some conversations that we do not like to have because we would rather for them to be proactive, but we definitely stay on top of that.
Gotcha. Great. Tom, you mentioned AI, and AI being that piece of
Being whatever it is.
well, I know. Well, in our world, I've been in it for a long time, and machine learning, LLMs, and all those. And you guys, there's a lot of sure. There's strike zones for application, but truly, when you look at and how in the security, and especially with the cyber threat piece, how would you and are you using and applying AI type of methods into your security threat posture?
Yeah, well, the company is encouraging the sort of positive utilization of AI, right? Because it can help us do our jobs better, smarter, faster, all that sort of thing. And I sort of touched on it in terms of, how we utilize it in the drone program and drones as a force multiplier. But obviously, AI poses, additional risk and risk to be determined as it develops and learns. So I think it could be something as simple as using AI to develop smarter phishing or smishing attacks on the company. As it concerns, AI that might be built into a equipment or system that we're buying, it really comes down to, implementing and utilizing that same sort of process that Charles is talking about, that a lot of it comes down to the cyber vetting process, right? The folks, I will brag on these folks. Like when we had the situation in Richmond, I don't know when it was, a month ago, where the water, we didn't have any water in the city, and everybody thought, well, that's just Richmond City. Well, as it turns out, Henrico County and Hanover County and all these other places get their water from the city of Richmond, and we didn't have any water. And I think these guys were able to procure, it was some ridiculous
200,000 bottles.
200,000 bottles of water for our employees and our field workers and that kind of stuff. They do a fantastic job in procurement, but I think they would say, sort of as I would say, I'm not an expert. They're not experts in cyber risk, so we rely heavily on this team of 60 plus. Cybersecurity experts, and I wish some of them were here today because they could go into greater depth on that to do that cyber vetting, and they use a third party to assist them, which is vetted, to make sure that we're as best as we can mitigating the risk that might be built in. And it's tough because let me step back. I think I look at some of the procurements that we've done on the physical security side of the house, and we just try to be smart up front about it. So we were looking a couple years ago to purchase a case management system because we're looking at all the investigations we do internally, but especially externally, as there are sabotage in our substations and groups that don't like what we do, right? So we wanted a really robust case management system. And so when we went out looking for that case management system, as we started talking to vendors and we kind of had a bake-off and working with the supply chain team, we made sure right up front that the folks the companies we were looking at, we asked some detailed questions about, where are your programmers stateside? Are you utilizing programmers that are in, Russia or Ukraine or I don't know, China or something like? Because a lot of the software that's being written, the developers and the programmers are from, they're not, domestic. So we kind of started with that from the get-go and really didn't give consideration to companies that were developing case management systems where some of the programming was done elsewhere. I don't think that can always be the case, but then you sort of drop back to, okay, well, if programming is being done outside of the continental US, well, then where is it being done? And I think another kind of common sense part of that is, I touched on it yesterday. We have 14,000 employees and who knows how many vendors. I want those 14,000 employees to be sort of junior security professionals, right? I want everybody kind of thinking about the security of the bulk electric system, because it is the lifeblood of our society today. So especially when you're in the highly technical areas, when you're talking with, big brained PhD double E's that are, working on algorithms and tools that effectively balance the grid when there's issues, whether that's a storm, whether that's a two-legged threat. Having those people on board with what risk looks like and saying to them, if you see something, say something. I mean, really come to security. Yeah. Let's look at that. And we have our insider threat program that, of course, helps with that. But we've had cases where an engineer that works in that kind of space comes forward and says, hey, we have an individual working on this, working for one of our vendors, and, we're getting, calls from them from said nation, and it's concerning us. Well, we want that kind of feedback because, it may or may not be something that supply chain or security would know about if we didn't have sort of those nodes of protections in the human form out there also thinking about security, even though it's not in a sense their day job, but it really is everybody's day job too. So I don't know if that helps. And then I'm going to stop there.
No,
I mean, the other thing too is, you're buying some component, and I mean, think about when you buy a car today, right? Maybe it's manufactured in the U.S., but how many parts and pieces are in a car, and where do they come from? Like I have a friend who's the import, like the customs broker for a large automobile manufacturer, and we talk sometimes just about the different components of an automobile and where they're coming from around the world, right? It all kind of comes together in the manufacturing process. Well, the same is true for us. Trying to understand the pedigree of every single component in the piece of equipment we're buying is a challenge for sure. And again, we're relying on our cyber teams. We're relying on some of the tools we have. We're also relying on industry and the community. So we're relying on the Department of Energy to help us with that. We're relying on the electric ISAC or the downstream natural gas ISAC. And fortunately, we're in a business where, I mean, are you a Dominion Energy customer out there? Kind of wave your hand. Can you get your electricity from anybody else? Probably not, unless, you got a generator or something, right? So in the industry, we're not competing with each other, right? There's no competition. So the ability to sort of, in a lot of respects, freely share risk and threat information across our industry and across our community is fantastic. And it's done regularly. So whether it's government agencies, whether it's sort of industrial groups like the EEI, SAC, Edison Electric Institute, et cetera, other utility companies, the national labs, right? We've had equipment that's come in, and you've seen even some of the presidential administrations say, hey, we got a transformer, there was some concerns there, it was shipped off to one of the national labs, they kind of reverse engineer it and, hopefully push out some information that says, be wary of this, that, or the other thing. Because we don't want that to be a vector where, as I think Mr. King yesterday, the DAD out of cyber was talking about, where we've got foreign nation states, pre-positioned on our assets, just waiting to strike, right? So that was a little long-winded there.
That's great.
No, you did one point of emphasis that I want to make is that, and I thought you did an excellent job. When you look at Dominion, a lot of times we get asked the question from a supply chain perspective, do you source a lot non-domestically? All right, and the answer to that is no. All right, so probably about 99% of our materials are sourced domestically. And so one would think that we would be safe. But to Tom's point, all right, we may be sourcing a transformer domestically, but the components And to build that transformer and everything else might be coming non-domestically. So now we have to go to another level to make sure that we're vetting all of our suppliers and saying, hey, where are you getting the components for this product that we're getting from you? And that's where there's a lot of risks that could come into play, that we have to make sure that we work together as one Dominion, with the cyber team and everyone else to say, hey, let's mitigate any kind of risk or at least identify any potential threats.
Yeah. And are you getting some of those risks from the workforce itself coming back into the supply chain across Tom's group, other groups, saying, hey, here's some critical things to think about? Is that right?
Correct.
That feedback loop exists inside?
Oh, definitely, without a doubt. There's constant collaboration,
Yeah.
and they will, without doubt, no hesitation, let us know that this particular laptop, it was manufactured in China.
Right.
All right. Oh, well, this particular component is coming from Russia.
Yeah.
We need for you really to look at that. We need for them to give us more information to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, that we should be engaging in business with this particular vendor.
Yeah. And this segues into what you and I, Charles, were talking about early February 3rd, I believe, executive order for fourth. Fourth. And so what happened is, we all know, right? So we have now a tariff which has several implications, 3 countries right now. Talk us through some of the impacts that's having with you.
So definitely. So on February 4th, the President Trump's administration signed 3 executive orders, and those orders were to impose tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico.
Yeah.
All right. This isn't totally foreign for us because China already had tariffs, so it's additional tariffs on top of China. And there's still a lot of uncertainty because everything hasn't been fully defined. But from our perspective, a supply chain perspective at Dominion, we wanted to be proactive and kind of say, hey, what would be, 1, the financial impact? 2, would there be any kind of disruption in us being able to get materials? And 3, is there going to be any kind of risk from a cyber perspective of that nature? Obviously, this is something that was unknown, so we didn't see it coming. And so obviously we went ahead and we kind of started vetting this immediately. We are fortunate that a lot of mitigation strategies are already in place. We can think about things from a couple of years ago with the pandemic. You can think about things that we have with outages with storms. We can think about any kind of disruptions that may lend itself to a utility company. So the first thing that we did, obviously, is start looking at our own inventory levels to make sure that, hey, from a short-term and a long-term perspective, how could we sustain, or how long could we sustain any kind of disruption in critical products that we need, or critical components? And so short-term, we like to define as 6 months or less, long-term, greater than 6 months. So that's one thing. Then the second thing, what we did is we started looking at, okay, our domestic suppliers. Is there a risk to them? Again, going back to my point earlier, are they sourcing from any of these places? And then those materials may be delayed, which will impact us being able to get material from them. And then lastly, diversification. We got with our standards team in all different segments, from a power delivery perspective, power generation, nuclear, you name it. We want to make sure, hey, are there alternative components, alternative vendors, things of that nature that we should be pursuing to make sure that, I hate to use these analogies, but, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you want to make sure you diversify that supplier base to where you do have options that you can go out there. We are critical infrastructure, so it's important that there are no significant disruptions whenever it comes to projects or restoration efforts. And so we do our best to make sure that we have long-term mitigation strategies and continuity plans to ensure that we're able to operate efficiently.
That's correct. So from a vendor perspective, saying how much of that risk are you got training, for example, coming up, that as a lot of vendors are trying to understand what tariffs are and an impact of cost. So how do you measure, and it may be something that's just a wave top, but is that cost, eventual cost, potential increase of cost, how are you spread loading that risk?
So right now, again, as I said earlier, there's still a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So one thing is that we're trying to clarify is I mentioned the 3 tariffs that have already been signed. 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I believe there was another statement made by Trump's administration that there would be a tariff on steel and aluminum,
Right.
which could have a significant impact
Right.
for many different reasons.
Yeah.
And there were statements that said, hey, it would be on raw material and some finished goods. Well, what exactly does some finished goods mean? From a raw material perspective, we feel like that we're insulated and would be fine. But if you start widening that gap and saying some finished goods, depending on what those finished goods are, it could have a significant impact.
Yeah.
So financially, I'm not in a position as of today until I see further guidance to be able to tell you exactly what that impact would be.
Yeah.
But it is something that we're monitoring on a daily basis.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Jeff.
You know, kind of tangentially.
Tom, real quick, I was because I'll lose this.
It's gone.
I'm over 35. No.
Aren't we all?
Wait.
Just a little bit.
Are you seeing more pings on the threat, the infrastructure, because of since February 4th, from bad actors, others out there?
Yeah, I don't know, and if I did, I don't know that I'd want to say if we were seeing sort of more pings on our network as a result of that. But I can tell you that world events do show changes in the amount of attempted intrusions to our networks. So, I don't know, for instance, when Russia invades Ukraine or something like that, we're gonna see that as it concerns, you know, sort of our security modeling and that sort of thing. So we do. I mean, again, I'm not the cyber guy, but I know enough to be dangerous. And we, of course, try in our, you know, as I talked about a little bit yesterday, we've converged physical security, cyber security, and Jonathan Bransky, 100-pound brain, threat intelligence together, so that we all have, you know, some understanding what each of us are doing. So when cyber raises their threat level and goes from green to yellow, we do the same thing on physical security side, and it triggers certain things that we're going to do to just, you know, kind of ramp up our defenses a little bit. Certainly on the cyber side, but even on the physical security side, that might be just more cyber patrols. So our analysts that are sitting in our physical security operations center, maybe they're watching certain critical substations a little bit closer than they typically would. So
Sure.
I don't know if that.
No, that's
helped
great.
at
Yeah.
all,
No, that's
but-
understandable. And but you were going to say something.
Yeah, what I was going to say was a lot of times I just probably spend too much time thinking about it, but like how is an organization kind of organized and structured to most effectively do their work, but certainly mitigate security risks and threats. So Dominion, and I suspect a lot of large companies are like this. My dad was an engineer with DuPont forever, kind of a cradle to grave operation. And they had this concept of shared services. And that's what Charles and I are part of. We're part of the shared services business, the Dominion Energy Services Group. And we serve all the businesses. So we serve Dominion Energy Virginia. We serve Dominion Energy South Carolina. And I think there's a lot of value in that because it's a centralized operation. So we take the expertise that you can see, you know, coming out of Charles and that understanding of supply chain risk and how to do it effectively and make sure we've got, you know, alternative means of procuring, you know, the stuff that we need. You want that to be spread across the whole company, right? You don't want to sort of like that have that isolated in this little node here that's doing their own purchasing or this node over here. So I think even the way that a company like ours is structured, where you've got this level of expertise and understanding of kind of the entire marketplace and can share and implement and govern, frankly, and administer that across the entire company, turns out to be particularly valuable. Now, I know Charles's team, like my team, embeds supply chain folks in those businesses. So, you know, Charles will have somebody, I think you tell me if I'm wrong about this, Charles, but I think I'm right about this, embedded, or many people embedded in nuclear, and they are experts in the nuclear business and what they need to procure and all the speciality that comes around with nuclear, right? but yet they're a part of the services business, and they're part of this supply chain entity that report up to Charles. So just the sharing of intel and the sharing of information, it just, that centralized model, I think, is very effective from a security perspective in particular.
Great comments, you guys. And let me get to workforce development and how in your teams, because and we all, right, as continued adoption of technology creates this vortex of what becomes, well, who's trained in it? Or is it a third party that's training us or other? But how are you guys working through, what is your continued plan to ensure that you've got the skill sets within your teams to be able to adopt to new supply chain threat risk and or just supply chain as a profession? So can you just comment on Wavetop that?
Yeah, I'll take it first and then
Charles,
let you kind of join in. From my perspective, I think active recruitment is essential. We have to partner with our local universities, tech schools, other agencies to say, hey, this is the best talent and we want that talent to come to Dominion. That is going to be critical. For the talent that already resides within Dominion, we want to make sure that we upskill them. So from a technology perspective, technology changes every day, as we all can recognize. And so it is essential to make sure that they're getting access to the tools and resources and the training that they need to be able to perform their job. Not only from an IT perspective, but from a supply chain perspective too. So as we're looking at contracts and things of that nature to help us mitigate risks, we got to make sure that they understand how the industry is changing and that they stay abreast and on top of those things as well.
Yeah.
And lastly, I'll say cross collaboration with partner utility companies. So again, we're not in competition.
Oh, that's
with one
interesting.
another.
Yeah.
So I like to talk to my peers at other utility companies to say, hey, this is a good university or something, or a good certificate or training or something that I see that is beneficial for Dominion, and I hope they reciprocate that and let me know if there's something that I can take advantage of to ensure that we have the top talent, top skill employees that we need in order to be able to do our jobs effectively.
You listening, Nathan? Where are you? Where's that guy? That's a great, what a collaboration, but also just in the vertical market of right, creating a better and stronger workforce and more talent. Yeah. Tom, you're
I think kind of the notion of cross-functional teams, like I've always been surprised when, if you are going to engage in a procurement for some widget or something you need, you get assigned personnel within supply chain that you're going to work closely with in putting that bid process together and the T&Cs and the contract and all that kind of thing. But I've been very surprised as I've met some of these folks and talked to them where they came from in the company. And, that's one benefit of being a part of a larger company is, you can move. If I'm in security, but if I wanted to go over to electric transmission or nuclear or something like that, well, they probably wouldn't hire me. But, somebody who actually has skills, you could do that. You could move from one place to another. Well, that, I think, creates this cross-pollination, I'm trying to say, that's very helpful. So as I'm engaging with some of the folks on the supply chain side, I'm kind of surprised, like, oh, wow, you were a engineer in this area over here, and they wanted to do something different, and now they're working in supply chain, but they know that area particularly well. And it really, and again, all in services, the workforce development team, the HR team, again, they're all part of shared services. So we all report up to the same kind of senior VP and president of the company, Carlos Brown. So really, I think there's just that sharing of information and knowledge across that team that's servicing the rest of the company. The other thing that the company does, and it's more recently in the last couple of years, and Charles could probably talk, much more educated fashion about it than I can, but I've been a part of the team that's providing input to this, is this, we call it TPRM, third-party risk management. So we've developed a methodology. We're developing a tool that when we do procurements as a company, if you're you're an engineer, you're a project manager in facilities, and you need to engage in a contract to, whatever it is, buy HVAC units for something or other, right? You enter into this TPRM system in this tool, and there's a series of gate questions that come up. So I use the drone example, and I think I touched on it before. if you're a Dominion contractor and you want to do work with us, and you're submitting bids, you get entered into this TPRM process in this tool, and it starts asking gate questions like, are you planning to use a drone, or are any of your vendors planning to use a drone in the performance of that work? And there'll be a series of questions like that, and when they answer yes or no, it drives the procurement towards the experts in that space. So if that question's answered positively yes, what's going to drive them to TF Butler? Wave your hands. Where's TF? I don't know. He's back there. He's our drone team, our unmanned systems group manager. It's going to drive it to that team, and they're going to make sure they've got the proper certification, pilot license, insurance, all that kind of thing. And then it's going to get into, well, what kind of drone are you going to use? And it's going to be a collaborative effort between the unmanned systems group, but it's also going to direct it over to cyber, where they're going to begin that vetting process on the drone itself, the controller, the components to the best we can of that procurement. So you can take that small example for utilization of a drone, but we're implementing that kind of across, we're doing it in stages, I think, with the more crucial procurements, right? The more crucial equipment systems. But having a system and a tool that does that and engages those experts from across the business is one way we're trying to, not create an obstacle, but certainly funnel it into the right people that can make sure that we're being as safe as we can in that procurement, if that makes any sense
sure.
at all. Did that make any sense at all?
Well, and just talking to the guys back, the team, and Scott specifically, we're talking the drone team for Dominion, and one of the to that point was for critical infrastructure to scale, also with the assets that they currently use, which are third-party drone assets, is that procurement, making sure that they have enough technology. And I was asking about sustainment and maintenance, like how do you keep those things up in the air, and continuously, and the threat, the triggers of, and supply chain would have the same reaction in a way, but that whip that once it happens, a critical critical infrastructure is attacked. Have you invested enough? Has it happened? It's the thing with drones, we've talked about it for many, many years, is that once a drone takes down an aircraft, that's the moment that everyone's going to take notice.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, or it's using an attack.
Using an attack.
Yeah, definitely.
And it seems that Dominion, and I think a lot of companies have obviously a lot of working cap to be able to put into its preventative way or predictability cycle. So, okay, good. We're rolling along. I got to workforce. I think we've got through, and my computer's out, so it doesn't matter. The back to supply chain, and I think the supply chain visibility, and then back to also on the security, the collaboration you guys have on data. So how is data, as you guys, whether it's vendor evaluation or whether it's security, how is that hosted, and how do you use data to help you make better decisions?
All right, so it's a two-parter.
Yeah.
For me. All right. The utilization of data helps us with our forecasting to kind of say, hey, this is trending out. Certain procurements, how much we typically spend on something, what's our usage rate, our burn rate through inventory levels, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So that is definitely a critical asset from an analysis perspective. All right, now where the data is housed and different things of that nature, that's when we really rely on our partners within the company, the shared services organization, to really vet vendors and different things of that nature. There's oftentimes we may engage in business with some vendors who want to store our data on their networks, or if they want to store it in the cloud, or are they attempting or trying to tell us that they want to store it non-domestically. And in all of those cases, they are vetted, and in some cases we're told, no, you cannot take our data and take it non-domestic or something, or you can't store it in the cloud. It just depends on the circumstance. And that gets back to the TPRM system that Tom was alluding to. it helps us identify internally who are the decision makers who can help us have those conversations with vendors so they can understand why there's a great risk to our company and why we elect not to allow them to do certain things.
Gotcha. Great. Yeah. Tom?
So Tom, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, just I was thinking about in terms of kind of having, and I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it just seemed really smart to me, having data that makes you more effective in sort of procurement decisions, especially when it's a very large procurement. But I know we had I won't go into the details of the project, but we had a very large capital project, and it was gonna involve the purchase of a lot of steel. And I don't know if we have economists that were doing econometric analysis and, extrapolation, nonlinear extrapolations and, stuff I don't understand, math I don't understand. But in any event, they were able to kind of early on, I believe, Charles, if you know what I'm talking about, lock in the price of steel
Correct.
years before the actual kind of
Fixed rate,
steel ending up in a storage yard or something like that, at a price that was very beneficial to the company.
So let me add a little bit on that. So we have employees in my organization called category managers. And so they're responsible for large categories of spend. And their only job is to sit there for these particular categories and see what the industry indexes show related to those categories. So to Tom's point, when this project was coming down the pipeline, this particular category manager started looking at all of their matrices and analysis that were out there, and it was telling them that, hey, the price of steel was going to escalate. And so it'd be better for us to go ahead and procure at least the steel components early and save the company a significant amount of money rather than wait, for 6 months down the line. And in this particular case, the category manager was exactly right. We got the steel in, we stored it, and everything was definitely advantageous to Dominion from that perspective. So again, a great utilization of data, great analysis done by this particular person, and it just helps us always look and vet to make sure that we're getting the best prices for Dominion, but ultimately for our customers.
And then as it concerns data storage, like we did a procurement, and it was the case management system I talked about earlier, and we made collectively with IT, cybersecurity, supply chain, and physical security that was largely going to use it, made the decision to put the tool on premises because the data is very sensitive to us. But I think as a rule, I mean, our industry, the company, I think is trending towards, again, more and more storage of data in the cloud. But we're, I think, very careful, cerebral, selective about what data we're storing in the cloud and what any of our data that any of our vendors, contractors, et cetera, might be storing in the cloud. Because as you know, there's been breaches of cloud data and backdoors left open by a programmer or something like that has impacted, and we get the letter about, hey, you get a free, service because your identification's been stolen or whatever. But anyway, I think it's a continually evolving sort of a security challenge and development for companies like us, but I think it's a little bit inevitable. I think again, not an expert in this space, but it kind of seems to me like the practicality of having all of your data stored on premises gets increasingly expensive and difficult to do.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, and especially sharing an example of one of your employees doing really great analysis and having that trust and confidence. That's a sign of great leadership. Tremendous. Okay, we're at that time for the Q&A session, and we welcome any type of questions you all might have. So you got the microphones here, and we look forward to some questions. Oh, you're fixing it. You have a question? Oh. Anything, you all.
metrics in your industry that we're a little over-digitized, that we don't look at alternative analog or mechanical systems in some cases to minimize how much exposure we have from a cyber perspective?
Tom, I'm gonna let you handle that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. I suppose it, really depends on what you're digitizing. I kind of think about like the federal government sometimes. I think they overclassify and it causes problems because information can't be shared. That's just, sort of my experience as an FBI agent. It's probably true that we over digitize information, just putting, collecting certain data, putting it in certain places that we, have to ask ourselves the question, do we really need to do that? At the same time, this is a pretty simple example, but I've become like a OneNote fanatic. I mean, I don't know how I existed with like yellow legal pads and, manila folders. I kind of put everything, and I'm over 35 to your point. So, it's in, it's out. I got to write it down now. And I use OneNote like crazy, but, then it's digitized, so to speak, On the other hand, like putting LPRs, like license plate readers at certain locations that can, digitize a license plate, and we're not sharing that with law enforcement per se, but having that information, and if we see like a concern, a threatening, somebody who consider a potential threat, and they're showing up at this location and they're showing up at another location, well, the digitization of that data is proving to be very helpful and effective to us in mitigating whatever that threat might be. So I don't know that I'm particularly skilled to answer that question, but I think you're probably onto something, and we need to be thoughtful and strategic about what we do and don't digitize.
Yeah, can I add something to that too,
Yeah.
Tom? Yeah, so from my perspective, obviously we're doing things from a global perspective now than what we were 30 years ago. And so it allows us to be more efficient and have access to data to make prudent decisions quicker than ever before. And so from that perspective, I think the digitalization has been very beneficial. When I look at it from, are we over digitized? In order to be in a competitive market that we're in, not only in our industry, but other industries, I think that's what's driving everybody to that digitalization of saying, hey, I gotta find a way to kind of get a competitive advantage. So I don't know that we're over digitized, but I do think that companies and industries are saying, what can I do to kind of get one leg up, if you will, on my competitor?
It's a good point. I think about just the different iterations that my team's gone through. When I got there, we sort of engaged in an effort of looking at metrics, and I would call them metrics that matter. I don't want just metrics to have metrics. I don't want data to just have data. But I want metrics that matter, that we can utilize to make ourselves better at what we're trying to do. Well, all those metrics exist because we're collecting a lot of data. It's especially true on the cyber side when they're looking at the attempted penetrations and where they're coming, where they're pinging around the country, around the world, and then they're coming in. I mean, all that data is incredibly useful in understanding, I think, for the cyber teams, what that threat picture looks like. So, yeah, I mean, executives or even people at our level, I think when you're making decisions, you want to see data. You want to see it collated in a manner that's meaningful, that you can use to make decisions. But there's a lot of data that we're collecting, and I imagine business is collecting today.
There's an expense component too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I totally agree with that. I'll give you one example as well. So, and this is a recent one, tariffs. So we had some executives that said, hey, I need to understand the impact that tariffs could possibly have on Dominion. And I didn't have a week to be able to give them that information. They were looking for something within 24 hours. And the only way I was able to ascertain and be able to disseminate the information accurately is because we are digitized, and I could go in and say, hey, I need to understand, what are we procuring from China? What are we procuring from Mexico? What are we procuring from Canada, if anything? And then, what are our potential risks, from a steel and aluminum perspective? What are the kind of components that our critical infrastructure is dependent upon from those kind of materials? So there's a lot of benefits to being digitized. But to your point, there is some cost that is associated with it, and as well as what's that happy medium, I guess is what I'm trying to say, before you become over digitized versus, hey, what you have is good enough.
Great answers, guys. Okay, anybody else out there?
All right, we were told this was 2 hours, so
I know,
got a
right?
lot
We
more
got
to go.
we,
All right.
there we go.
Hey guys, thanks for the presentation and discussion. It's been really illuminating. My question relates to the vetting process, specifically around vendors and products. I'm wondering how you come up with evaluation criteria to vet vendors and products. Because I imagine it changes depending on the widgets that you're looking to procure, but you also have to be somewhat objective in the way that you do it so that you can compare apples to apples across vendors. So can you talk through that process a bit?
Yeah, and so there's different factors. So for the point of this conversation, I kind of geared it more towards the IT components. So anything that has an IT component is going to get vetted. I don't care if it's a wood pole that just has something for tracking mechanisms to say, hey, this pole was set in this location. We're going to make that kind of assessment to say, hey, is this a potential threat? So any IT component, hands down. So we just take any kind of uncertainty out of that equation. All right, so there's different vetting processes too. Let's think about from an environmental perspective. All right, if we're procuring certain chemicals and different things of that nature, we need to make sure that our vendors are taking the appropriate steps, that we're not going to have some kind of incident from an environmental perspective and be getting a phone call from that perspective. So any chemicals or something, that's a different vetting process as well, but very similar to something that we're doing with third-party risk assessments, where there's a series of questions that we will ask that vendor, and based off their responses, it lets us know what level of response we need to have with them. All right, so does that answer your question? Okay. And it just simplifies it when you think of it from an IT perspective. I'm not a subject matter expert in all things IT, and you know, I rely heavily on my colleagues to point me in the right direction for those kind of things. So if you can simplify it for the supply chain organization and just say, hey, if it's going to have an IT component, we want to go through a vetting process. If data is going to be stored on a network, whether it's their network or our network, but we may not have all control over it or something, we need to vet that and everything. And then they'll lead us down the right path as to what steps need to be taken to mitigate any risks.
I think too, Dr. Givens, what sounds like maybe you're getting at a little bit is kind of where does that vetting process occur in the procurement timeline a little bit when it comes to like fairness or something like that. And again, not my area of expertise, but I think when we're going out to bid for, you know, pick a widget, there's requirements sort of that are set up initially that just establishes who can even be part of the procurement process, right, for that particular widget in that particular space. And then, you know, based on the requirements, I think if you make that cut, that's when you're starting to get down to more of the detailed vetting that includes the cyber vetting and other business unit experts that are going to be part of that conversation. But I know the company is really careful to be very, you know, fair in terms of all of our procurements and the number of bids we get and that kind of thing. And if we're to sole source something, for instance, that takes higher levels of authority as well as justification for I'm sole sourcing, you know, for this particular widget, and it's because it's the only one that works with our other widgets or something like that, right? So I don't know if that helped at all.
We got one in the back. Yes, sir. And over here. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. My name is Craig Hines. I'm with the National Defense Transportation Association. We spend a lot of time thinking about how to bring industry and government together, identify challenges and issues, and solve them. And I wondered if you guys could just give us some insights, what industry representatives here, give us some insights as to what you're seeing happening with wargaming or tabletop exercises. What involvement do you have with the industry, with government, and you know, how is information being shared that helps us get at this issue of resiliency and trying to build more of it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, on the defense side, I think you'd call it wargaming. You for us, we're a little more, I don't know, kinder, gentler, I guess, we'd call it, tabletop exercises, that sort of thing. Although our cyber director will frequently, to kind of sober everybody up, say, we are at war. I mean, we're at war. There are attempted penetrations of our network every single day, right? And like thousands of them. So in that sense, we are at war. I think Jonathan Bransky yesterday may have touched a little bit on something on the cyber side of the house we started several years ago called Cyber Fortress. And it's essentially bringing in all of the federal components, state, local components. So they kind of fire up their cyber range. They, develop scenarios they have sort of a, red team, blue team, that is defending our network, and the red team attacking our network. And we bring in the FBI to be a part of that exercise. We bring in the Virginia Air National Guard to be a part of that exercise. We bring in the Virginia State Police, VDEM, all these entities and others as part of that 3-day event I think we do every year on the cyber side. That's not the only thing they do, because throughout the year there's a lot of sharing, again, with industry, et cetera, but also with those components that we're doing Cyber Fortress with. The industry, I want to say it's every 2 years. Somebody in the room can probably correct me. They call it GridX. It's across the country. All of the, it's a tabletop exercise involving all sort of bulk electric system owners, operators, where a scenario is put forth kind of across the country, and we exercise it together. And we've been doing that for several years. We have a pretty robust, just within security, I can speak to, but certainly for the company, a crisis response plan. It follows sort of ICS protocols, DIMS protocols, and we exercise that. And afterwards, we after action it very much in the same way, I think, like the military. In fact, some of our designs for doing those after actions, we've pilfered from the military. This is how they do it. Well, that's a great place to start, and we utilize those in doing our after actions. The good news, I think, for companies like Dominion is several times a year, starting in the summer and moving through the fall and even in the winter, we kind of get to exercise that emergency response.
Real time.
It's not a two-legged thread, it's, Mother Nature, but, that to me, and that's kind of like a company like Dominion, it's sort of like their Super Bowl. I mean, we have meetings, in the spring to get everybody, around the table, large groups, to say, hey man, how are we postured for storm season? How are we going to respond? Pre-positioning of assets. And we have an amazing meteorological team, emergency response center, our storm center. And so the fact that we do that, we prepare before the season, and then we exercise it throughout the years, the storms roll in, gives me a lot of confidence on the security side that if we had a security event, and, pray to God that never happens at some sort of mass level, because we are doing that several times a year during the year, that, hopefully we're very well prepared for a response to that. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, and for everybody, in the preamble, I mentioned that Dr. Leslie Wilhelm, who's going to be here, she, in fact, leads with Department of Navy Energy, a wargaming TTX type of playbook, and with that comes the design for TTXs, and then really Indo-PACOM concentration right now of critical supplies, supply chain or classes of supply, movement of those energy and requirements across that exercise. And part of that is that she's building to is a synchronization with nuclear agency, with lettered agency, other agencies, and security on that supply chain. Moving products from different parts of manufacturing to in that exercise into, and it's tough to get into those scenarios to get real-time results, to your point, Tom, of having force majeure stuff that happens, daily almost. So, yeah, so I think there's that break. NDTA and GEL's conference here, these are other conferences. I would welcome Dominion to be part of those, because we have tabletop exercises ongoing throughout that conference. And for everyone else, it's really a cool way to watch some of the folks in the vendor side apply some of the measles, or what is the exercise support type of scenarios. So.
Yeah, and Dr. Bush mentioned that NDTA conference, I think, in June of this year.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we'll absolutely be a part of that.
No.
for
There,
sure.
there was another, there he is. Question down here.
Good morning. Do you know if Dominion is using drones manufactured by DJI? And if so, how does that vetting process look? And are you looking to go a different direction?
I just saw Adam Lee sitting behind.
Yeah,
you.
I saw.
He's hiding in plain sight.
Oh, there he
over
is.
there.
Yep.
I know the
There's an
answer to
empty
this
chair, my
question,
brother.
but we're gonna ask our CSO to speak on that one.
You answer that one.
Tom runs the drone program for Dominion, and we have a couple of vetted vendors, Skydio being principal among them. We do not use any DJI drones. We do not use any drone technologies that are manufactured or coded in China. In fact, any other high-risk country, but certainly not China. So all domestic, and Tom and his crew work very closely with our third-party risk management group in the cyber branch of our organization to, in some cases, reverse engineer if it's sort of edge technology and that sort of thing, to ensure that there's no open source coding or anything else that might compromise the drone technology. So very circumspect about that, because that's a known vector for that.
Yeah, and that's something a lot of legislatures, at the federal level, at the state level, are considering what to do about that. And of course, the challenge, I think, for law enforcement, right? Because a lot of us came from law enforcement. We're engaged regularly with law enforcement. They're really good drones and they're cost effective, right? We're paying more to have U.S. manufactured drones. Again, we just don't want our infrastructure data going to potentially to a hostile nation state. But we understand the challenge. Law enforcement, municipalities have more limited budget probably in that respect. So I feel for you a little bit. Yeah.
It's a great question. And let me ask you though, and Adam, this is part of, so that discovery of use and different type of drone sets. Are you taking any of the lessons learned right now out of the Ukraine-Russia war in some of those those threat type of scenarios, and putting that into tabletop exercise, perhaps? Is that something to consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem in, I can't say enough great things about DJ Smith from VSP, who was up here, sitting right here in the panel yesterday afternoon. That is just, he's just such an amazing resource for, anybody in the Commonwealth and really around the country. But I think the largest impact of what's going on in Ukraine-Russia war is just the technology that is being used there, both to use drones as a payload delivery device,
right.
But also to defend against the drone. So especially in the counter drone or drone mitigation space, it's like a test bed. It's almost like a laboratory in a sense. So on the one hand, the fact that they are developing new ways of unfortunately using drones to hurt human beings, that presents additional risk to all of us and to our infrastructure. At the same time, they're also developing technology to mitigate that threat, and that will help us, ultimately, if we can get more authorities for our SLTT LEO partners as well as critical infrastructure to defend against those drones. So it's it's a little bit of both and who's winning out at the particular time.
Oh, great. Yeah, super. Okay, we've got time for one more or not. Anybody out there? There we go. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you guys for being here this morning. There's a little bit of discussion about the tariffs that are currently being raised against some of our allies and some of our people that there's a little bit more tensions with. And just kind of returning to that point, I was curious if you guys believe from a professional standpoint, are these tariffs something that you look at sort of positively with the idea that, once we get over like the hump on a little bit of difficulty transitioning, like this could be really good for our domestic industries and the creation of technologies within America itself so we don't have to outsource to other countries? Or overall, is it something that's looking a little bit more negative because it will kind of cut off some of the sources that we currently work with or make it harder to work with them?
I'm gonna give you a 100%.
Please introduce yourself.
Sorry, my name is Sydney. I'm a student here at Christopher Newport. I'm a sophomore. I'm in the National Security Program.
You're here.
I'm gonna give you a 100% political answer. We're indifferent. All right, and that's my personal opinion as well as my professional opinion. I think there is some things that could be positive that comes from the tariffs for the United States, and there probably could be some things that could cause some disruptions. Obviously, I'm in supply chain, so I have my hand on the pulse of materials and different things of that nature, making sure that we're not going to run into anything from that perspective. But I think it's too soon to tell for me to weigh in on an opinion of saying, hey, I'm 100% in the positive or the negative category. Okay.
Yeah, this is one of those, danger, Will Robbins, for anybody from that, So I'm taking my Dominion hat off for a minute, but so not speaking for the company, but to Charles' point, I think there's some positive things that come out of it and some negative things. So, just thinking again for physical security, we put up a lot of fences and things like that. So if the price of steel goes up, then, that could have an impact on our costs, right? And ultimately that means maybe an impact on the cost to our ratepayers. At the same time, I think if certain, if they help in sort of a broader security effort for the country, that's a good thing. And if sort of certain critical manufacturing is able to be driven back stateside, think pharmaceuticals or something like that, as all of us went through COVID, well, there's certainly some benefits to that, I think, long term. So, all right, putting the hat back on.
Yeah. And with that, Tom, Charles, boy, what professionals, what dynamic leaders. Thanks for keeping us safe. I know I'm a user and a lot of others are recipients and customers. So round of applause, folks.
Thank you. Appreciate it.